I'm Sarah Delau. It's good to be here. And I'm hosting Normal Island. For once, I literally had so many tech issues, but finally, no more tech issues. And I'm joined by the incredible Noffel. How are you doing today on this fine Monday?
I'm doing good, thank you. Yeah, we've both had the host of tech issues, very overstimulating. So it's all good now. I'm glad we've got it up and running.
Absolutely. I'm super excited for tonight's show. And what we've got coming up is actually super interesting. So, our first story is that Trump invokes 18th century law to speed up deportations. Wes Streeting on our screens all the time at the moment, saying that there's an overdiagnosis of mental health conditions, and Reform UK candidate Jack Aaron, who praised Hitler and Assad, has finally, or for some reason, been put in charge of vetting. But as always, please remember to like the stream. And if you're not a subscriber, please hit that button. I think we literally just hit 19,000 subscribers today. So that's super exciting. But we want to reach 20,000 subs as soon as possible. And I don't think we're that far off at the moment. So hit that button and we'll be getting to your comments at the end of the video. So please make sure that you're busy in the chat, give us your opinions and stay engaged. But on to our first story. The US has deported 250 alleged gang members to El Salvador, despite a court ruling ordering them to halt flights. And just when you thought the US immigration system couldn't get any more draconian, Trump has decided to dust off the wartime 1798 Alien Enemies Act. Yeah, the same law used to justify the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II to push these deportations through. And then Bukele tweets this, the president of El Salvador. Oopsie, he says, too late. Now, doesn't really feel like an oopsie when the Human Rights Watch, found that hundreds of Salvadorians deported to the US were killed or abused. The Human Rights Watch literally says that specifically there were 138 Salvadorans were murdered from 2013 to 2019, and 70 others were abused or sexually assaulted. Before we unpack this a little more, I want to bring Noffel in because I'm really keen to hear his thoughts on this. The US created the conditions that have given rise to gang violence in El Salvador through Cold War interventions, mass deportations, and economic exploitation. Isn't this a form of neo-colonial violence to now deport people into the very crisis America helped manufacture?
Well, let's take a look at the two nations which Trump has targeted this weekend through the wartime law. So we've got El Salvador, which throughout the 80s, Reagan's administration had basically given the equivalent of $1 million every day to military juntas whose main overall goal was to crush civilians. And a lot of these death squads carried out what's known as the El Mozote massacre, in which they're still finding bodies today of women and children. And then we go over to Venezuela, which has long been crippled by US sanctions. And United Nations reports that about 100,000 people have died as a result of that. So for decades, the US has long seen Latin America essentially as its own colony. They'll extract resources to enrich American companies and their markets. They'll force regime change through military coups, crush leftist opposition and civilians through death squads. And when all of that basically fails, they'll just decide instead to enact deadly economic blockades that makes countries unlivable. So I would say any sort of gang violence, like you said, that has been brought up by US conditions is really the result of US intervention. And any gangs that are, I say gangs because the wartime law allows for people to be deported without charge or trial. Really, the US needs to take some sort of accountability here.
Will they ever take accountability for doing these atrocious things?
I really don't think they will.
Mm.
The foreign policy has destabilized these nations a lot. But the important thing to note is we are seeing consent being manufactured in real time. So while though one can say, okay, well, these are violent criminals, because of the same act that was used during World War II towards Japanese citizens, there's going to be many that are innocent, many that are innocent. And so what we'll end up seeing is, unlike in World War II, where in the 80s, the Japanese citizens were rewarded with some sort of compensation. These people are going to be ending up going to jails where they could possibly die, where they're going to have no sort of legal representation, and it's all going to be done in the name of foreign deportation and basically creating an enemy for Trump to target.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a really great point there. This this scapegoating of people that they can easily racialize, right? And this is an act that's obviously infamous for being used to suppress political dissent as well, and target immigrants. And I think particularly those that are deemed politically inconvenient. I think his reliance on this law, I think, serves as some sort of like ominous precedent. But what shocks me the most is that he's trying to skip over the standard immigration procedures that are actually in the US at the moment, including court hearings and access to a fair trial and the due process and protections. So, like you said, the removal of consent or the ability to present evidence in their defense is completely removed. So those sorts of actions undermine the fundamental principles of justice and rule of law, which is what America seems to pretend to stand on. They say that, they pretend. Like, I think it's all this is a facade, essentially. But I also think that the Aliens Act, even the name itself, I think, is a law that's rooted in xenophobia and has been resurrected all for political theatre. I think we know that Trump is this, boisterous and ridiculous political actor. And I think he's now extending this application as a means to blur the lines between crime and war. So the logic here is deeply flawed. But yeah, I do have another question for you, actually, because if we actually absorb this, it's a law that's written before the invention of the steam engine, before the abolition of slavery, and before women could even vote. And now it's being used as a means to to target migrants, which I think is Trump's aim here. But what I'm really keen to know is why is the US government so quick to criminalize entire groups of migrants, branding them as gang members, when its own domestic white supremacist militias who actually pose a proven threat are left untouched and even pardoned?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's really a question you could ask since the invention of institutions within the US, like the military or police. You take a look at police, and they were formed out as things like slave patrols. Historically, have had the ability to crush unions, ask for higher pay for essentially inciting more violence, and like you've said, they pose a real threat. There's a real demographic of people that go into the military that tour in these countries, like in the Middle East, and they come and they have a higher proportion to commit violent crime. Not these immigrants, by the way, that are coming over the border. It's people at home that are radicalized throughout the system. And I think it's really important. There was a French Marxist named Althusser, and he wrote about it. And he said there's two types of institutions that you get. You'll get a repressive state apparatus, and you get a ideological. And it really seems that the more extreme Trump's economic policy gets in terms of gutting the state, he needs more and more populist framing of enemies. And it comes purely into this idea that there's no more soft power anymore. There's no more guiding of principles ideologically like the Democrats did in the name of freedom and democracy. It's all complete hard power to completely gut the state as he's doing. And it's what Naomi Klein would call the shock doctrine effect. Make sure everyone's overwhelmed right now. They don't understand anything that's going on. Come next election cycle, things will be terrible, and they won't know which direction to go through.
Absolutely. I think that's a really, really great point as well, to be fair. And I think it kind of paves the way for even more radical abuses of power. I think we're seeing Trump really exert too much power. And I think what we need to do is kind of mobilize together and expose that strategy, that this is not about safety, but about him consolidating authoritarian rule, essentially, under the guise of law enforcement. And under the guise of, I want to protect America and I want to protect our civil liberties. But what he's doing is he's creating this us versus them narrative that you aren't good enough to be in America, so therefore go away. And also it sets that precedent, doesn't it? So everyone who sees this happening, because I was looking on Twitter, and I don't normally go through Twitter at all because sometimes it's an absolute minefield.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
under under Kelly's oopsie tweet, there were so many people being like, "Yeah, good, get them gone. Why should we have to deal with them in the US?" And that to me is so frightening because people are
yeah.
backing the fact that he's brought this outdated wartime act into fruition.
100%. And I think it really speaks to this boomerang effect, in which, if you take a look at Latin America throughout the 1900s up until now, and how America has essentially treated citizens, it's a boomerang effect. It's called the imperial boomerang, where anything that you subject other civilians to in other nations will come back to bite you in the end, because the same rhetoric that they use. So military juntas, or the death squads I was talking about under Reagan, or all these different forms of opposition and control in terms of dissenting free speech in, let's say, Guatemala, where
Yeah.
the US famously turned it into this banana republic. The same free speech dissent is coming now. We've just seen a green card legal citizen in the US, Mahmoud Khalil, who's in detention for simply free speech, which I thought the right apparently loved, but seems not. And it will take time. It will take time. People may not see the full effects now, except for their grocery bills, but over time, as things become more and more shifting to the right, because we know the Democrats aren't going to move left, they're going to move right, things will appear to affect the average American citizen more in their civil liberties than they think right now.
Absolutely, completely agree with you. Yeah, there's definitely an intent to sidestep constitutional protections rather than enforce legitimate justice, and that the case of Mahmoud is actually really really frightening because it seems that free speech only applies to those that are echoing the biases that they want to hear. If you
Yeah,
aren't
yeah.
speaking on things that that the government are aligned with, you're critiquing foreign policy, then yeah, that's free speech that isn't acceptable. So yeah, really scary times. I do want to go on into our second story, and we're looking into Wes Streeting, Labour's very own budget-friendly Tory, who decided the real crisis in mental health isn't underfunding, or overwork or the grinding of brutality, of life under capitalism and a cost of living crisis. No, it's overdiagnosis, according to him. Here's what he said. Here's the other thing: mental well-being illness is a spectrum, and I think definitely there's an overdiagnosis, but there's too many people being written off. And to your point about treatment, too many people who just aren't getting the support they need. So, if you can get that support to people much earlier, then you can help people to either stay in work or get back to work. That's right, written off like a car. According to Wesley, too many people are being told they have mental health conditions. Now, I don't know about you, but this sounds an awful lot like the government literally trying to gaslight an entire population into thinking that their suffering um is all imaginary. You're not depressed, you just need to have a better attitude. You're not anxious, you just need to work harder. um but let's get serious for a minute because this is not just nonsense, it's absolutely dangerous. The stats kind of speak for themselves. There's 1 in 4 people in the UK who experience a mental health problem each year. NHS waiting lists are absolutely insane at the moment. They've risen by 29% over the last 2 years. And we have 1.8 million people who are currently waiting for support. Suicide rates have unfortunately been creeping up, with 5,500 deaths recorded in 2022 alone. Um, and Streeting's big concern is overdiagnosis. Maybe try address the underfunding. Novel, are we witnessing a deliberate effort to pathologize mental illness as a personal failing rather than a structural issue linked to poverty, insecure work, and housing instability in order to justify underfunding and cuts? And shouldn't the conversation kind of be around fixing those material conditions?
Yeah, well, it's almost like pointing to this conversation, telling us we're all crazy, we're all, we're completely off it. We have no clue what we're talking about, and actually, we're completely overreacting to our material conditions. Right? The framing of an overdiagnosis is not just a lie, but it's intentional blaming directed at the whole population. And as you say, it's a gaslight tactic. Westring is acting like a obsessive ex-boyfriend, blaming you for everything, rather than rather than admitting it's completely his mistake.
Yeah, so
You know,
true.
all you have to do is really follow the money. And private equity and private healthcare invested in streeting, and they're looking to make a return. And so this deranged sort of run that streeting is going on is a complete reflection of what the Labour Party has taken a hold of now. Its whole NEC is for the hedge fund bankers. His campaign was backed by private healthcare, and it should be no surprise to any of us that Labour basically don't want to fix the issues that we have. They want to be in power and they don't want to govern. The thing I'm personally confused by, and maybe you can elaborate on this too, is it's the same exact thing we said about the Conservatives, which is they get into power, they don't want to govern. So I don't know why we're not characterizing Labour as the same now. Will it take Stream to wear a George Osborne mask in Parliament before we start saying he's like an austerity minister? It's something I'm really concerned about, and it'll be far too late before people start to collectively realize that they're no different.
Yeah, and I think people are realizing it already. It seems that the Labour Party is cosplaying the Tories, and it's something that Curtis said the other day, and I was like, oh my god, that's such a good point. That Labour didn't win, the Conservatives just lost. Because if you actually compare the stats or how many people voted for Labour, it really wasn't that great in comparison to Corbyn. So it's like, actually, Labour aren't even the popular party, to be honest. They're just the party that was there because people were sick and tired of 14 years of Tory rule. But this reactionary rhetoric that I'm seeing from streeting is obviously something that we see with the Tories and we see with the right quite significantly. But it definitely is a thinly veiled attack on those who are struggling. Like, the notion of mental health isn't a serious public concern. It's just something that you need to kind of just like get over. And it does play into, it fits very, very neatly into the neoliberal playbook, where structural crises, underfunded healthcare, rising poverty, the mental toil of precarity, and how hard it is to get certain resources are reframed as an individual failing, like it's your fault this has happened. Or in this case, the problem is too many of you are being recognized as needing help. Well, of course, people need help. You've literally driven them into the ground. People are struggling to pay rent. People are struggling to buy a property. People are literally glorifying hustle culture, 2-3 jobs, and it's disgusting. But then on top of that, people don't have the capacity to go and get another job because it's difficult. That this society is actually I feel like neoliberalism is just taking a stronghold of all the rhetoric and all the policies currently in Britain.
No, I 100% agree, and it's the sort of individualism that was birthed out of Thatcher's policies, right? Where it was destruction of council homes, it was a destruction of trade unions, selling off manufacturers, things that we manufactured within the UK, and those were really socialist understanding of the world around you, right? Which was based on collective class consciousness, being able to operate within a workplace where you felt a bit more equal, where you were actually producing something for your nation, or at the very least in a trade union, you felt like you had some sort of bargaining power. And obviously, because neoliberalism destroyed all of that, what we're back at is the circular sort of rhetoric that probably we've heard for 100 plus years before we were all born, which is workers, you're not working hard enough. You're completely not working hard enough. And I think it was really good that you brought up especially the statistics, because even us joking aside, it will have a real impact, right? This sort of dangerous rhetoric that streeting is playing about with, it's going to force people to look at themselves rather than the material conditions. They're not going to talk about their issues, not only because there's no one to talk about, in terms of the NHS, but simply they'll feel like that they're not working that second or third job like you've mentioned. And I think this sort of austerity manifesto and these ideas perpetuated is the cost of running capitalism. You're literally losing lives to run capitalism. And it's like Marx says, you will just at the very least be given sustenance to live, and everything on top of that, doesn't matter if your living standards drop, it doesn't matter if your life expectancy drops, as long as you have children, it's all okay. This is the real cost of running a economic doctrine that is not beneficial to any of us and was never set up for any of us.
Yeah, it's such a great point, because actually it's not just dangerous, it's actually ideological, isn't it? Like the notion of him even trying to assert that it's overdiagnosis aligns very, very closely with right-wing narratives that seek to delegitimize mental illness as though it's not a disability. I think people are still attached to the notion that disabilities are visible. And I think times have moved on. Like, disabilities
Yeah.
have not always been visible. We are dealing with very, very different issues. But it does go back to Thatcher. Deindustrialization, privatization, and underinvestment were all things that were happening during that era and are continuing to happen now. My worry and my biggest fear is that if they continue to portray mental illness as this fad, as this, a product of the weak-minded, or that it's a burden to the state, that might set the stage for the government to justify further cuts to mental health services or more restrictions when it comes to access to therapy and medication. And then on top of that, an overall rollback of rights for disabled people and even those who are like neurodivergent too. It's a
Yeah.
spectrum, isn't it? I mean, I'm not trying to echo West Street, but it is a spectrum. So
Yeah.
my worry is that further cuts will happen. And I think we're kind of seeing at the moment with these threats when it comes to, we're going to cut PIP and be careful if you're on PIP and rah, rah, rah. Like, it's terrible. So, it's not just about mental health, but maybe this is more about, I mean, they said we're going to get, they got rid of NHS England and those are their plans. But what if they seek to privatize the NHS more? And that if these mental health conditions are overdiagnosed, and the next logical step for a politician, for a government, is to argue that the NHS is wasting resources, and that the private sector efficiency is needed, and all this sort of stuff. That's my worry, that the corporations should take over more healthcare provision.
Yeah, I think it's completely valid fear to have, especially like I said, streeting didn't get funded out of nowhere by private healthcare. They want an investment. That's why you give money to politicians, right? So he can talk all he wants about bloat and inefficiency, but we never talk about bloat and inefficiency when it comes to private contractors. It's never mentioned. The austerity and the cuts always have to come at something that's genuinely quite efficient. Either it's genuinely decent managers, or it's people like you've said that are just completely reliant on the state for a good reason because they've been seen by a doctor and they're disabled. That's not bloat. You can frame it as such, but the reality is that the private contractors, which we'd be giving tens of millions of pounds for basically not good standards, is the real issue. We take a look at PFI in Blair's late years, for example. We're not close to paying off the debt for that for another, I think, 2 decades. And so we need to. I think Grace Blakely said it really well in her book, which is Vulture Capitalism. But she said that public services, when they get privatized, they're on a death loop, essentially. No one thinks about anything long term. We rack up more and more and more debt, and we don't actually fund things for efficiency, but just for the sake of, hey, we're paying enough money into it. Here's some inefficient things that we're going to try and do, which is cutting out real essential services, which, for example, may be freezing PIP or making it hard to qualify for PIP. And what you're left with is just the grounds running for a far more radical government next election.
Exactly. It feels like it's just going to get worse from here. Like, if the government actually admits there's a mental health crisis, then they might actually have to fund services.
They might have to do their job.
Yeah, they might have to do their job, or actually we have to put money into the system that we took things out of, or regulate these exploitative working conditions that people are working within, or address the years and years of austerity that have led to this. But I think what Wes Streeting's trying to do, if they try to convince the masses that they're just imagining their suffering, then problem solved. And it's kind of the same playbook we've seen. I think we've been speaking on this when it comes to welfare cuts and the rise in homelessness, and even long COVID. So the state manufactures suffering, then tells you it's all in your head. And I think it's insane. And I think you kind of answered this actually as well, because you were touching on capitalism and the impacts that it's having on all of us. But do you think we're witnessing a broader trend of the government essentially gaslighting people into thinking that their suffering isn't real to justify dismantling the welfare state?
Well, Sarah, you might want to stop there, otherwise you'll probably be verbatim quoting Marx. Essentially, it's a bad day. It's a bad day when someone's looking at the news and in the back of your head you're thinking about something that Marx wrote, and you're like, "Yep, the guy was right." That's not something you actually want to happen. But no, it's completely true. I mean, like verbatim what you said, it's false class consciousness. It's this idea that we're handed down through the way we work and in the conditions that we work, that it's in actuality our faults, not our material condition around us, but instead we have to try and live up and go line in line with what our managers are saying, with what CEOs of companies are saying, with what the shareholders are saying for extra profit. It causes you to look at the world, not materially, not of something based in reality, not the idea that your pay is low and your rent is high, but instead it forces you to look at the idea, which is, I have no clue what's going on. I have no clue how things are working. All I know is that I'm not working hard enough. And my friend over there has got about 3 jobs. That's probably what I'm going to have to do next year if my rent keeps going up.
Literally. Oh, Nofo, you're killing it today. Honestly, you're making such great points.
Thank
It's
you.
so true. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. But yeah, I think we'll move on. I think we've kind of like gone into streeting quite a bit, and rightfully so, because he's an absolute disgrace. But before we move on, if you are enjoying our show, then please like and hit the subscribe button. Once the show is finished, come back and leave a comment, sing my praises, please, and thank you. And novels, actually, I think it helps with the algorithm, but and of course we read them too. So it's really interesting to hear your thoughts on the stories that we bring. We are just a group of volunteers who are trying to turn this into a full media organization, where this becomes our full-time job. So if you'd like to support us, you can go to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. And there you can sign up to our Patreon and support us for as little as £3 per month. But don't put yourself out. You can also give us a one-off donation through our website too. Alternatively, you can become a member on YouTube for 99p. But on to our final story. So meet Jack Aaron, who said Adolf Hitler was quote unquote brilliant at inspiring people and described Assad as quote unquote gentle by nature. This guy is now in charge of the party's vetting process. Jack Aaron's comments about the Nazi leader and Syrian dictator came to light last year when he stood for reform in the Hatfield constituency. He also claimed that Putin was use of force in Ukraine was legitimate. Aaron made the comments as part of a pseudo-scientific theory of personality types. He's the president of the self-styled World Socionics Society, a group that promotes the idea that there are 16 personality types. And in 2022, he went as far as to say on Twitter that Hitler was brilliant in using these personality traits to inspire people into action. But here's the thing, this isn't just a gaffe. It's not some rogue member who slipped through the cracks. This seems to be a pretty concerning pattern when it comes to reform. From the reform founder Farage, who claimed the West should accept Putin's invasion of Ukraine, to Robert Lomas, a once parliamentary hopeful in Barnsley North, stating that Black people should get off their lazy asses and stop acting like savages. This party is a literal haven for reactionary far right politics. And now we have this latest embarrassment. And what does this actually say about Reform UK's real agenda? They pose as anti establishment, but somehow their candidates always seem to share the same brand of bigotry: anti migrant, anti Muslim, authoritarian, and nostalgic for this imaginary past where Britain was great because it ruled over others. Novel, with Reform UK openly tolerating figures like this, should we stop pretending that they're just a right-wing populist party and call them what they are, a gateway to fascism?
Yeah, well, I think it's not worth waiting 2 election cycles before they start having toothbrush moustaches. We should probably start. We should probably start saying it now. I think one of the issues is the fact that even when you take a look in Parliament or electorally, people aren't willing to put up a fight against reform. Unfortunately, that's the main issue. And I really think it's because Labour as a party, as we've seen, are also very scared of the right. They are very timid. And it goes back to this idea that, we can't really rely on them to make our voices heard, because the problem is they will keep moving further right, because that's where they believe they'll win the votes. Same thing with the Democrats. And I think you're right. But I also think it's on the left to describe what fascism looks like now. It's no longer this military doctrine anymore like it used to be, which was getting a bunch of young men at a very young age to defend their country because of the embarrassment of World War One. Now it's completely manufactured, like those terrible things that Reform UK member said, like you just quoted. It's now completely based on culture wars and straight up white supremacy. So, you know, with this whole conversation in the background going on about recently identity politics and whatnot, I think honestly it's time for the left to make a strong case. I don't think we should actually drop identity politics like the conversation has been going on about, with Ash Sharker and whatnot. I think what we should be doing is not using right-wing framing at all, because this is what fascism looks like for Reform. It's what it looks like for MAGA, and that's how we need to talk about it.
Oh yeah, completely agree with you. This is the gateway into fascism, and I think they're completely rooted in fascist ideals, aren't they? So what the party did when he was making those comments, I want you to also comment on this, Novel, if you can. But the party made remarks that Aaron had. They were like, look, we need to highlight his Jewish heritage. And his family were persecuted under Hitler's regime. What do you think of that cynical attempt to kind of deflect legitimate criticism? Why is it? And it kind of goes hand in hand with what you're speaking about when it comes to Ash's book and when it comes to identity politics. It was almost like this weaponization of, hey, look, he can absolutely applaud Hitler and his regime. He's someone who has Jewish heritage, like an oppressed group. What do you think of that?
I it's such a honesty. Yeah, I'm quite speechless. I think it's almost like I said before, we just need to be out and open with it. There's no point gaslighting everyone on the left that they're woke, snowflake, sensitive people. It's just completely untrue. There's no point capitulating to that, regardless, in our speech. I think really the main thing we need to be saying is, you guys are running the identity politics. You guys are the emotional ones. You guys are the snowflakes. Because the truth is, when you have a group of people that feel they need to highlight the fact that someone is Jewish, they've got Jewish heritage, and therefore they need to defend everything they're saying, or we have Kemi Badenoch highlighting that she's a black woman and therefore she cannot be racist, or Rishi Sunak talking about his Indian heritage. Hello, where is the identity politics on the left? It's happening on the right. It's completely happening on the right. It's insane to say that we are woke snowflakes, emotional, sensitive people. These are the same people hiding behind their identity to weaponize their politics. And it's really time we call it out straight up for what it is and say, I don't care about how politically correct this sounds. And I was not afraid to say it, but I said Rishi Sunak's a coconut. He is. It's honestly just being out and open. Obviously not saying things like that, but it's honestly out and open, just saying the right are playing identity politics. You cannot hide behind what you criticize for the weaponization of breaking down the welfare state, or making it harder for people to buy homes. And it's about time that we start going around with that narrative and making them look as stupid as they really are.
Completely agree with you. Like that, the tactic literally reeks of weaponizing identity to shield regressive agendas, right? Like it suggests that one's background, irrespective of where they come from or what they align with, really, it means that it immunizes them from perpetuating harmful ideologies, and that's not the case at all. I think we need to really dismantle that. You're absolutely right. It happens on the right so much. This weaponization of identity politics. They do it all the time when they try to let's, like, I think, on the right, but let's protect British identity. Let's protect Britishness as much as possible, because our British identity is under threat from these small boat migrants who are coming in and all of this sort of stuff. And I think such reasoning to weaponize your identity to shield regressive agendas is not only intellectually dishonest, but it also undermines genuine efforts to combat bigotry in all its forms. And it is like, for example, with Jack Aaron getting this position, I think that it should be viewed as a calculated strategy to shift the Overton window. So the range of acceptable political discourse further to the right, by normalizing individuals who express admiration for authoritarian figures, these dictators. Reform kind of attempt to make extremist views more palatable to the public, and that to me is my biggest concern. I've been using this word quite a bit today. Actually, I think it's my 5th time using it. I used it at work quite a lot, but it's like such an insidious approach that kind of
Yeah.
paves the way for policies that erode civil liberties. We're seeing it in the US. It links to our first story, and then targeting vulnerable populations and entrenching systemic inequalities under the guise of populist rhetoric. So I think that's my biggest concern right now.
No, 100%.
Yeah.
I think you summed it up perfectly with shifting the overton window. I don't have any more to say on that.
No problem. I do just have one more question when it comes to this, but Reform brands itself as a common sense party. So what does it say about their judgment that they put a literal Hitler fan in charge of candidate vetting? Do you think he will do a good job?
I think the problem is, you said it really well. They use an insidious approach. The truth is, Farage is a good speaker. Rupert Lowe draws on. I mean, he's a lot more extreme than Farage. If you see his Twitter, he's tweeting about 20 times a day about random issues and random articles from the Telegraph. And I think the real main issue may be that a lot of people might not find reform palatable this election. My worry is there might be a German style thing where they'll come into power possibly the election after that. So we see AfD lose this time and the moderate conservatives got the vote, but they may lay the ground running for what people really want, which is in a replacement of populist economic policy, we're seeing populist social policy to say that this is going to solve all your issues. And I think what reform really loves, and this is the same as America, is driving off the apathy surrounding everyone. And that's the common sense. It's very easy to talk to people who are already happy to scapegoat others because they're not doing well, and they're doing that because they feel apathetic. They feel like that is the issue. Everyone's telling them that's the issue. And I think into rebuttal that, we need to instill hope within people. We need to say, look, these are the issues, but this can be the solution, right? And tell people that the common sense is something that's being manufactured by corporate figures and corporate leaders. It's not the common sense that the working class has always needed and has always prevailed at.
Honestly, really great points. I think, again, it means mobilizing on the left, right? We have to recognize that this encroachment of authoritarian ideologies into mainstream politics is not a distant threat. It's something that is very much a present reality. So I think we very much need to recognize that, as small as this may be, Jack Aaron's now newly appointed role, I think it's just a broader assault on democratic principles and an attempt to kind of rehabilitate oppressive ideologies and make them the norm. So I think if we want to reclaim the narrative, we need to center the voices of those marginalized by such extremist views and work towards a future where it is a lot more hopeful and a little bit more, a lot more empathetic. I think apathy is way too normalized. So yeah, it's definitely incumbent upon us to, advocate for a just and equitable society and expose these maneuvers at every turn that seem to be happening on the right. But really great points, Novel. Thank you. So with that being said, I would like to bring in our wonderful producer who's been doing such a great job today and go to some comments if we can.
Hello. I always feel like it's the voice of God in this moment where you can't see me, but you can hear me. Thank you. For those of you wondering, it is, of course, me. It's Callum, Political. Just before we go any further and before we discuss some of the topics, I just want to take a moment just to say a huge thank you to our wonderful Turn Left community who have been extremely generous with memberships this evening. We have had 5 Turn Left memberships gifted by Specs Bean Farmer. We've had 5 Turn Left memberships gifted by Idiosyncrasy. And we've had not only 5 Turn Left memberships gifted by Andy Carter, but an extra 6th one that came along at a sneaky 10 minutes past 8. So thank you, Andy.
Thank you very
to
much.
the others
Such
for your support
community. There. Amazing.
We've got a fantastic community, haven't we?
We do.
You're all fantastic. So thank you so much for your support there. Now, Where to begin? Should we start at the end and work backwards?
Yeah, we can do.
Yeah.
We've got this one from Graham, which just made me chuckle a little bit. I'm not a Nazi. It's actually a Charlie Chaplin moustache excuse coming in 3, 2, 1.
Machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. Literally. Yeah.
It reminds me of that. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but that Key and Peele skit. Oh, it's really good, and it's essentially this guy walks into someone's home. He's got a Nazi flag. He's like, "Don't worry, I'm a World War II collector." And then it goes on to his mustache. He said, "Don't worry, it's just the new style." And it keeps. It's what Sarah was saying. You keep pushing the Overton window to see how much you can get away with until eventually you're like, this guy's just a Nazi.
Yeah.
It is quite terrifying, though, isn't it? How people are using these excuses. I mean, we saw what happened with the Elon Musk Nazi salute, and the way in which people were trying to excuse that by saying that it was a Roman salute, which is also, well, apart from the whole debate as to whether a Roman salute even exists, the concept of it is born from fascism. So whether you call it a Roman salute or a Nazi salute, it's still a fascist salute. But yeah, I just thought it was a clever sort of observation there of the way that these people have been behaving. We do have some others on this one, but for some reason I can't find the ones that I starred in true turn left fashion. So we'll move on to the previous conversation. There was one thing that I did want to bring up, actually, that Specs brought up, which was on the GB News clip that Curtis was in. Shout out to Curtis's performance on the show yesterday. They kept mentioning how work is great for your mental health, which is fair if you're very lucky, yes. But in the gig economy, slinging just to eat or Amazon boxes. And I thought it was an interesting comment, because this idea that if we all just work, then that's going to solve all of our problems, and that's going to pull us out of our mental health crises. As Dominique says, have you tried not being depressed?
That's the rhetoric they're going with, though. It's so wild. Like, have you tried not being anxious? Have you tried not being depressed? Have you tried going outside? Like, it's just so dismissive. So dismissive.
I sat in a GP surgery with a somebody close to me about 8 years ago, who was struggling massively with their mental health. And I kid you not, the doctor looked them straight in the eye and said to them, when you get home, try having a lie down and a good cry. Like,
it's like what the school nurse used to say to you, which is, you graze your whole 2 knees and a cup of water, you'll be fine. No worries.
Yeah, a cup of water and a blue paper towel.
Yeah, wet paper towel.
I think there's something that's not that's sort of being overlooked at the moment as well, and that's the effect of the COVID pandemic. I mean, there's obviously the point which I think we might have touched upon about people that are suffering with the effects of long COVID. I spoke to a woman in the pharmacy the other day who'd gone in to pick her meds up, who used to be a nurse. Actually, she was a community nurse. She caught COVID during the pandemic and has been suffering horrendously with long COVID ever since. And she said to me, I feel like I've been completely forgotten about. She said there were some support groups available to us at the time. They've all now disappeared, and all the money that was being pumped into the community and into the NHS from the nurses' perspective to deal with that has now dried up and disappeared. She ended up losing a job due to long-term sickness. Wow. She's now claiming sickness benefit due to long COVID. She would rather be looking after patients and working in our health service like she was, but due to no fault of her own, she's now out of work, and the Labour government are now classing her as she shouldn't be on benefits, should she? She just needs to get back into work. She'd love to get back into work, but it's the same with mental health. Without the funding and the investments into long COVID or into our mental health services, how can we expect people to be fit and well enough to return to work? And somebody else pointed out in the comments just quickly, I've not got the comment here, but somebody else pointed out about the toxic work culture that exists in this country. And there's also that element to it as well. If you are someone who is already struggling horrendously with anxiety and depression, if you are working in an environment that essentially, is bullying you, or is isolating you, or is making you, work until you are flat out, burning out, penalizing you and disciplining you for being ill, and then overworking you for very little pay, are we to expect anything else?
Exactly. Like, I think, the rising rates of anxiety, depression, burnout as well. I think this is something that's really, really undermined. And burnout, they're not a statistical accident, but they are a literal direct consequence of what you were saying earlier, Noffel, like capitalism's relentless grind. And people are grinding for low wages and precarious work and climate anxiety and a social safety net that is literally being systematically dismantled right before us. So I think his dismissal of this crisis as some sort of overdiagnosis, what he actually is doing is invalidating the real suffering of millions of people. And it is a form of gaslighting. Like you said, it's like the abusive ex-boyfriend you can't get rid of, wants to make light of that. But
Yeah,
it's
that was a good analogy.
it is, because it's like
Yeah.
relentless, telling people that your mental distress is exaggerated or it's fabricated, rather than a reasonable response.
But
to a society-
also,
yeah,
it's not addressing the cause of these problems either. I mean, according to the World Health Organization, and a briefing that they put out in 2022, the COVID-19 pandemic triggered a 25% increase in prevalence of anxiety and depression globally. So we have just experienced, Edward Sexby said, the conditions of present day life lead to mental illness, insecurity, declining living standards, sky high rents, rising cost of living, environmental crisis, rising fascism. Throw all that plus a global pandemic where, many of us experienced some horrendous traumas. We couldn't see loved ones when they were literally dying. We had to have limited numbers of people at funerals, and you couldn't even hug somebody when you were grieving. That's before you even take into account the effect that the illness had on many people. When you factor all that in, and you look at, we've now got a group of young adults who are now just about to, well, some of whom are just entering the workplace, who missed a year or two nearly of school because the schools were closed during the pandemic, and they didn't get to go through that period of their life as well. It's no wonder that we've got a rise in mental illness. But the answer to that isn't to force those people into work. I mean, Noffel, what do you make of Edward's comment?
I think one of the massive ones is sky high rents. I think the rental sector is completely non-predictable. You could be one day housed and the next day you could not be. If we take a look at market prices and market trends, you have no clue if next month your landlord's going to put up the rent or not. And I think when we're having a lot of these discussions, housing is such a massive thing. It's where you sleep, it's where you eat, it's where you drink, it's where you go to bed, it's where you rejuvenate, it's where your family is, where your loved ones are, right? That is a massive stability thing. And especially because people can't really own homes anymore till decades later. If you are in the rental sector and you're constantly having to move about and you're constantly having to sort out new public transport if you don't have a car, or if you do have a car, even longer commuting journeys, it's a headache. It structures your whole life change. And I think I genuinely think the way the landlord class have continued to be completely parasitic in this country does not nearly get enough talk in any sort of headlines, because the way private property is just handed out to people in which they can just keep it as an asset. Your pay is basically going towards their profits every single month. It doesn't get nearly the amount of talk it does, and it doesn't nearly talk about how big of an impact that has on our mental health, even negating the already terrible public services and health service.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Like, anyone who knows me knows that I say this all the time. I don't think that we need some ecologically damaging thing where we build more houses. We don't need to do that. I think what we can do is actually abolish landlordism. I think landlords are an economic deadweight who are raising prices in an unregulated rental market. Like, we have, 100%. I can't remember what the statistic is, but there are way too many landlords than we have teachers. Like, so there's a real issue at hand.
And many of those landlords are MPs as well. Just throwing that one out there. But there is a
terrible conditions. If you take a look at one of the Labour MPs, I forgot his name, who voted for the disability cuts, his flats are in terrible condition. There's black mold everywhere.
There is an inconsistency here, and we see it across all political parties. But it's quite telling at the moment. Shannon's said Wes is an idiot. Only a couple of years ago, he was tweeting out that there is a mental health crisis, which there is, but now there's overdiagnosis. So which is it, Wes? And
Oh,
Go on, Sarah.
this has just added to my hatred for him. Well, I didn't even know he did that. So thank you, Shannon, for bringing that to my attention. Oh, he's even more disgusting.
But isn't that always the case though? That they when in opposition, they're calling it out, and they were actually in fairness to Wesley, he was accurate to say there was a mental health crisis, but now as in power, all of a sudden, no, it's an overdiagnosis. But I think it also feeds into what our wonderful colleague Cog said. As Curtis pointed out on GB News, Pip has a 0% fraud rate, but Rachel Reeves needs a scapegoat, a sacrificial goat to escape responsibility.
Well, that's really good. Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with you. And you know what? The Labour Party tries to posit itself as this opposition to neoliberalism. Sorry, no, you're an enabler of it. And I think by adopting these narratives, you have Streeting, who is literally helping to pave the way for further dismantling of the NHS, more privatization, like I was saying earlier, and more suffering for those that are the most susceptible, the most vulnerable to harm, all while pretending to be a reform of the NHS. Mate, do one. Tired of you.
Yeah. I think it just goes to show like the idea of a binary party in how different they are from each other is it's really grounded in narratives and grounded in what they say. At the end of the day, you can say as much as you want, like I said, with West Streeting and Rachel Reeves and Starmer talking about blow and the lack of efficiency. But the truth is it comes from private contracts, really. And like I said, Streeting's looking to make an investment on the money he's got from private donors.
Yeah. Exactly that.
It's always the way. Just before we move on to the first story, just Andy Carter, Health Secretary, is a massive overdiagnosis for Wes, which I thought was quite good. Just before we move on, shout out to Chronically L, who has also gifted 5 Turn Left memberships while we've been doing the comments. Really appreciate it. And that came 1 minute after you became a new member too. So you became a member yourself and you've gifted some. So thank you for that. As always, we are grateful for your support. Natasha, Sarah, shining as always.
Oh my God, pack it in. Thank you.
Lots of love for Noffel in the chat as well. Just going back to the first story, Edward Sexby again. ICE runs a network of facilities that are already like internment camps as it is. Both parties oversaw this. This is just the next stage in fascism.
Yeah. And they're going out to private companies as well. The overall cost, I can't remember exactly the right figure. I think it was $3 million per tent. And the narrative Trump is pulling about putting people in Guantanamo, there's barely been anyone there. So this is like a Rwanda scheme where you're basically spending millions of pounds in which another company is benefiting off it. And really, you're not doing the job that you're going to say. It's almost like it's all a farce. And this is completely performative.
Yeah,
and it's actually he isn't just going after quote unquote foreign aliens as the legislation is titled. He's going after British tourists as well. A friend of a friend of a friend of mine has actually been in the news recently. Becky Burke, she's a British tourist. She went to the US. She was doing some traveling and she'd been staying with a host family out there. And in exchange for accommodation, she was doing some sort of household chores around the home just to sort of sort of give something back for the fact that she was being put up for free. She wasn't working. There was no monetary value exchange. She wasn't out there to work. She tried to get into Canada. Canada said, we think it sounds like you're working. Sent her back to the US. When they refused to let her in, the United States government turned around and said, oh, no, actually, we think you're working too. And instead of just sending her back to the UK, they currently have her detained in a detention camp in the US. This is a British woman, she's Welsh. And she's reporting as herself that the conditions that she is in are horrendous. she was accused of violating a visa, like I say, because they claimed that she was working. But she's not been deported. She's just been detained in a camp. She's had one towel to use the entire time. She's had a lot of her belongings taken away from her. And her family have had to put a GoFundMe together to raise some money to help with legal fees and costs to try and bring her back. So, you know, I mean, this is happening to people of all backgrounds. You know, it's happening to people that, you know, that Trump would have, well, that the Biden administration would never have dared to do this to. So
I'm actually going to stop you there, Cal. This is bipartisan. Biden was also terrible in Guantanamo. I'm sorry, but
I agree. I agree with that. I agree with that.
Foreign
but he certainly
policy
wasn't.
When it came to deportations, when it came to the horror that he did in the southern border, that's where I'm going to have to completely disagree. This is a completely bipartisan thing where, you know, Trump might be showing the hard power, all that he wants, but the Democratic Party are just as terrible. I remember being young and seeing ICE with Obama in prisons. Biden might have not, you know, championed the hard power like Trump's doing, but this Guantanamo and this whole deportation process and tough on the borders, they have not been any different.
No, I don't. Forgive me if I was if it came across that way. I don't disagree with you what you're saying at all. Actually, I completely agree. What I was sort of alluding to was the fact that you know, Trump's taken it to that next level where he's also got citizens of what are supposed to be allied countries also in detention as well, which I don't think Biden was ever locking up British tourists, but I may be wrong with that. But yeah, no, fair point completely.
Yeah, a really good point. And we also need to look at the broader political strategy that happened amongst the Democrats and also with Trump now in power. But it's just normalizing authoritarianism. You know, they want to, I think when we're criticizing Trump, like his return to power is marked by the sheer commitment to more extreme measures. But you're absolutely right, Noffel. Like Obama did it, Sleepy Joe did it, and now you've got bless him, he was always sleeping at the summits and stuff and all this sort of nodding off. But yeah, now Trump, I think Trump's just a little bit louder with it. Whereas you've got these covert Democrats who pretend that they're on the left, but actually they're very, very right-leaning themselves. There is
the other element in this as well that that Els just brought up, which is the thing that really gets me about the Trump administration is the bragging about it. The deportation ASMR, the Valentine's Day post made me gag. Yeah. And I mean, some of the videos, and we've seen the same, we've actually seen it not to the same extent, but we've seen that here in the UK with the Labour government, with the videos they put out of the immigration raids on, you know, people that they said were here illegally. You know, it's sort of, it's almost like they're turning it into entertainment for people. It's really sickening.
And this is what I was saying, right? Which is we take a look at fascism, and we take a look at the type of political ideology it was, which was like a national embarrassment. Losing World War One, Hitler came along and he really capitalized off that, the hyperinflation that people were facing and the debts that they had to pay back with the Treaty of Versailles. What we're seeing now is a complete manufacturing and weaponization of culture wars, as if someone due to the color of their skin across the border is stealing your masculinity. Or someone it's really stupid. You must have been really insecure to begin with, but by no fault of their own, because declining economic standards makes men feel like they're completely tied to their mode of production, and that is just how gender is set up. Maybe not to sound too, but that is just how man and woman is set up in the West, which is you're a man if you go out to pay, you're a man if you do this, you're a man if you do that, and you're a woman if you're able to purchase these things to look a certain way. And I think it completely capitalizes off this apathy, and I think, like Cal was saying, it directly mirrors back to us in the UK.
It does. They capitalize off the social resentment that people are harboring as well, and it forms a competitive ethos of neoliberalism, doesn't it? Like, hey, you're fighting for scarce resources from these people who are coming in. Be careful, be warned. And it's like, no, it's not the years and years of underinvestment and privatization and deindustrialization. It's actually, the people coming into your country. It's just a scapegoat. It's a pivot, and it's a diversion from the government.
Just to sort of wrap up, a couple of more comments from Andy. So Andy said, sadly, like most failing empires, the US is going to hurt a ton of people on its way down, and I think that is something that we need to be prepared for. On a lighter note, poking fun at the name of the ancient legislation, can't have them Martians coming here and taking our jobs. But yeah, we have to find something to laugh in this situation, because the truth of the matter is just too horrendous to really want to focus on for too long, but we have to, because it's affecting real people. Just to wrap up on the comments, Graham, haha, why did I give my webcam a thumbs up when you asked if we can hear you, as if I was on a work Zoom call?
I'm going to start asking if you guys can hear me at the start, and I will tend to be muted. Can you hear me?
And just one from Specs Gratz on the 19K gang. Thank
Good
you
stuff.
very much. We could not have done it without our wonderful Turn Left community. So keep being fabulous, keep liking, keep commenting, and yeah, thanks for being part of a wonderful community. I'm going to go back to my behind the scenes role now. But thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Callum.
Thanks, Callum.
Really great comments. So yeah, that's all we have time for. I think it's been a really great show. Take it easy on me. It's my first ever Normal Island. But it's been so great to be joined with Noffel. You've been incredible. And thank you to everyone.
As of you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who tuned in as well, and all the memberships that were given. You guys are so incredible. It's been a really great show, and yeah, remember to like the stream, and if you're not a subscriber, then hit that subscribe button. We're trying to reach 20k, as you know, and if you want us to grow, you can head over to turnleftmedia.com/support. So go there and you can support us on a monthly basis, or follow the other link to give us a one-time contribution. Thank you again, though. I'm Sarah Delau, and I'll see you next time.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.